Hello, 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 TM24 here, and we are back with some more Marvel Snap content. If you're just now finding the channel, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, thank you for the continued support. I appreciate it. You know, my llama Loki here appreciates it as well. And let's talk about the new card, Jean Grey. So you guys are going to see some gameplay footage here as I give you my thoughts on Jean. You're going to see 3 different decks, and at the end, I'll show you each of the decks and give you some potential cards that you can swap in and out for what you see on the screen right now. But Jean Grey, right? 3/3, and she forces both players to play their first card on her location unless they can't. So, on the face of it, 3/3, that's pretty standard. Lines up with things like Cosmo, like Captain America. It's very, very standard 3 drop. Now, her ability is super unique, right? It forces both players to play on her before they play anywhere else. So what this does is it gives you opportunities to take advantage of that, knowing that your opponent is going to have to play on there if possible. So pretty cool because it allows you to run some cards that you otherwise probably wouldn't run. You know, the Guardians of the Galaxy, it was big for a while when Nebula first came out, but then it kind of went away. Cards like that are definitely going to benefit from having a card like Jean around. Additionally, she's going to really slow down and probably win you games against decks that tend to go tall, right? So those decks that are utilizing things like Electro, that are waving things out, all of a sudden, if Jean is on a location that is empty, they are going to have to play there. Now, you're going to have to do that as well, at least for your first card. Now, if they played Electro and you played Jean on an empty lane after that, congrats, you won the game. Good job, round of applause. But, you know, you've still got to get your power down there as well. So, I think she's a super unique card, and you can see in these games, she forces your opponent, and potentially you at times, to make suboptimal plays. Obviously, you can build your deck in a way that takes advantage of her ability, which is the idea. And I found that in games that I was able to get her down, she did feel very powerful. She felt, you know, she felt like she was shaping the game because we were forced to play on that location. So, it seems like a card that is going to have a ton of impact. It just, for me right now, I think we need to see how we are going to build the best deck around her, and if it's a card worth building around. I feel like she fits fairly easily into a couple of different lists. You see here a Surfer list, that seems pretty standard because, you know, she's a 3 drop, so Surfer can go ahead and hit her. You can fill that lane pretty quickly with a card like Brood. Another list that you'll see here in a moment is the Cerebro 3. Again, she's 3 power, kind of slots really nicely into that list. I love Control. Control is probably my favorite type of list to play. That and combo decks, of course. If you've seen any of my shorts, you know all about those combos. But, yeah, I mean, she, in the Control list, she just felt a little, I mean, she felt pretty good, right? But if you're going to be playing kind of your curve out, so if you plan on playing a 1-drop on 1, 2 on 2, 3 on 3, etc., then all of a sudden you've got to fill that lane as well. So it could be a bit tough if you're trying to play some of those decks that go taller. Kind of like we talked about, we forces our opponent to do that, to play on that location, but it also forces you to as well. So it's just a little bit tough sometimes, depending on how your deck is built. In a list like this one here, this one specifically, she felt solid, but I think what I would have loved to done with this list, and I'm going to talk about it when we get to talking about potential replacement cards, is sometimes on turns, you know, 3, 4, and 5, if we don't hit Sarah, you're only playing 1 card, and if you've got her down, you know where you're playing it because that's the only spot you can play it unless you filled it up. But I do think it creates unique opportunities to run cards that, you know, you otherwise wouldn't run, and that feels pretty good about it. I think there's a ton of potential with her. I think she can shape these games, and it can make it really, really tough on your opponent, especially if they've got cards that benefit from, you know, running in only certain locations. One card, for example, Warpath, if all of a sudden they've started playing in 2 lanes and you put Jean Grey into the lane that they haven't played in, that Warpath is nullified. So it can definitely force your opponent into tricky situations, but you into them as well, unless you build your deck the right way. Now here you'll see a Cerebro 3 list. I actually feel like she felt probably best in this one, but that's because we've got a couple other cards that we can slot in there, right? If we get Jean down on 3, you've got something like Bast or Wasp that you can play on 4, and you can still get out a 3 or a 4 drop, or even a 5 if you played that Wasp. On turn 6, you know, again, you can still play on that location. You know she's going to be buffed up, so she's all of a sudden one of your power cards. So I feel like she really excelled in this list, and I liked her in the control list, but it felt a little bit tough. The Surfer list was probably the best out of the 3, just simply at winning games. Now, her in those games, I'm not sure how much of an impact she really had. I think maybe that list was just solid, but like I said, there are a couple cards that I wanted to add to that list to just make it feel a little bit better, flow a little bit, and, you know, use all of your energy when you can. You know, that's the idea. You're going to force your opponent to play there, you to play there, but you need to set yourself up so that, you know, you can win those other locations as well. So you're going to see here this really super satisfying Cerebro 3 game, and then we're going to get right into talking about the 3 decks and the replacement cards in them. But you can see here we're set up really nicely with the Cerebro 3, and this is exactly what I was talking about. We've got to play on that location, but we have Wasp ready to go, so it still allows us to get an Iron Man down. And then if you look ahead to next turn, turn 6, we have both a 4-drop and a 2-drop, so we feel fine playing on that location and then being able to play on another location as well. And in this Cerebro list, anything that you're playing down all of a sudden is a power card because of Cerebro. So I think she's going to be really strong in this type of list, and I'm excited to see how she does once these lists become optimized. But you'll see here, we're going to get a nice big win here. Cerebro coming through clutch, Shang-Chi coming through to clear them out of Baxter building, and we just get a nice dub. She definitely forces, like I said, some suboptimal plays. You'll see here, they definitely think they've got it with Hitmonkey and Angela holding that lane down, but Shang-Chi's going to come through, and then they're going to see the big flip. Well, the game's already over, but they see it here once Invisible Woman shows her hand. And right now, Invisible Woman is seeing a lot of love from a couple different decks. I do have another video coming out kind of featuring Invisible Woman, so be on the lookout for that one. But right now, this is all about Jean Grey, and you'll see here she helped us get a big win, and we're going to talk about the list and replacement cards right now. All right, so here we are. These were the 3 decks that you saw during the gameplay footage. The first one was this control list. Now, this one actually felt fairly nice just because we went a little bit heavy with the 1-drops and, well, the 3s and unders, right? It makes up more than half of our deck. And honestly, you could probably go even heavier towards these 1s and 3-drops. But Kitty Pryde, great, because she's a perfect target for, you know, for that Jean Grey lane. Again, there's the Angela synergy, and we do have some of those Guardians of the Galaxy cards that can really benefit from, you know, from Jean Grey out there. Now, a couple cards that I felt a little bit underwhelming, and those were actually Professor X and Spider-Man, and simply because if you haven't filled that lane, you've got to play on it. If you haven't won that lane or you're behind, Spider-Man feels great, but if you don't have Spider-Man in your hand, Professor X does not feel good at all because you're already behind. So the list overall felt solid. Gamora on 6 is an absolute beast. Couple that with either Rocket or Kitty Pryde, and you're going to win that lane. But some replacement cards that I could definitely see in this. I love Professor X, but I think his natural companion here would be Daredevil, because he's going to show you what's going on 5. If you can get Daredevil down, maybe Jean Grey isn't the play, and you could just go ahead and go with the Professor X play on 5 and still have a Gamora, Kitty Pryde, Rocket down coming on 6. So I think Daredevil could be a nice inclusion in this list. Additionally, we are running into a lot of cards that had high power, so I would love to include something like a Shang-Chi in this list as well. And like I said, I'm probably looking at one of these two to take out. Additionally, Punisher honestly didn't feel that great. I felt like he would have a ton of synergy with Jean Grey because those lanes are going to be filled up, but sometimes he just felt a little bit tough to get down. To get both him and Jean down at the same time, you want to play something a little bit more powerful. You have to play on that lane. So Punisher felt okay, but he might be one that we are looking at taking out as well. Now, there are a couple other cards, and you might just want to go all in on the Guardians of the Galaxy. Nebula would be a great inclusion. If you can get Nebula down, put Jean Grey on a separate lane, it's going to be tough for them to challenge that Nebula lane as well, especially as it gets to turn 4 and 5 and those power cards start coming out. Nebula might get out of control. Additionally, if you wanted to go something like a Groot, another nice inclusion, because you know that they're going to have to play on Jean Grey, so you know you're going to hit with Groot, and all of a sudden it's a 3-6. So those two I think would be solid. And then one last inclusion that I could definitely see, I think Armor might actually be a pretty solid inclusion as well. I think Armor is great. You can kind of have some protection for some of your big cards on turn 6. I'd play it on a lane separate from Jean Grey, depending on how the turns go out. So I think those 5 cards would be good replacement cards for maybe Punisher, Professor X, Spider-Man, depending on what you want to take out. The rest of these cards feel really good. Chavez provides that consistent draw. We already talked about Gamora being an absolute beast. I love Jeff. Nightcrawler and Jeff, let's talk about them for a second with Jean Grey. It allows us to fill up that location without giving it up. So we can make sure that lane is full on, turn 5, maybe even turn 4 if we play something early. And then we haven't committed to that lane fully. We could always move Jeff on 6 or Nightcrawler on 6, and then get some more power down there if your opponent's committed. So I think a couple of these move cards, or having the ability to move a card on that Jean Grey lane, is huge. So something to think about. But this is the control list, and those were the cards that you could potentially swap in and out. But let's look right at the next list, and that's the Surfer list. And this is the one that felt the most awkward to me, and maybe that was just because I built it a little bit too heavy on these 3 drops. As you can see, we've got the vast majority of our deck being the 3 drops. So I would love to see a little bit of change in here, and actually I would probably go with something like an Angela. I think Angela would be great in this list. Additionally, I could see Goose. Goose would be a solid inclusion because all of our cards are going to be under that power threshold, and that gives us a lane that we're probably going to win, especially if we can get something like Maximus, or we get Goose down, follow it up with a Brood, and you'll just win that with Surfer on 6. So Angela, Goose, I could see both of them. Additionally, you could probably go with a couple different 3 drops if you wanted to. Polaris might not be a bad inclusion in here as well. I know we just talked about Punisher, but I feel like he would fit a little bit better in this list. So Punisher potentially. Rogue, maybe not a bad idea with all of the all these ongoings going around. So I think those ones would probably be a really nice inclusions. What I would take out I would say. Shadow King just didn't seem to hit for me, so I think I would take him out. I was excited to get him in a deck and see if he could make something, but honestly didn't feel that great. So if I was going to rework this list, he would probably be the first one to come out. Other than that, I kind of like what we got. I like having Storm on 3, and then you could either Brood if you have that, you could Juggernaut if you have that, following it up even with a Groot. Doesn't feel all that bad, so I like the Storm kind of little package in here. If I was to rebuild this right now, I would probably add Goose, and then I would maybe look at... I like the rest of these a lot. Groot would actually probably be my next one to go, and that would be in favor of Angela, but her value is kind of limited because we don't have something like Kitty Pryde to continually play on her and buff her up. But I do like this list if we change it a little bit. Like I said, turn 5 felt the toughest in this list if you didn't have Sarah, just because then you're playing just a 3-drop or maybe a 3-drop and a Nova. If you have Jeff, great. If not, it felt like you were leaving a lot of energy on the table. So I'd try to get another 2-drop in here. I think 2 might be good. Maybe even add a 3rd. But overall, I like this list, and it is actually the list that I won the most with, even though it felt the most awkward at times. But let's get into the last one, and that's the Cerebro 3. Now, this one's pretty straightforward, right? Because we're looking at cards that have 3 power. But one card that doesn't, which might actually be a really nice inclusion, would be Luke Cage. There are still a ton of high evolutionaries running around, so Luke Cage would be a good inclusion. Other than that, I mean, you're probably looking at 3-drops, something potentially like a Cosmo. Might not be a bad inclusion. A little bit of protection on something like Cerebro. Additionally, those cards with 3 power, if you want to change up a location, you have Scarlet Witch would be a good option. Rhino is another good option, which he is a 3-drop, so he's a little bit more expensive, probably why I wouldn't run him. But you could also run something like Sentinel, just to make sure that you've got enough power out there to continue to get that power down and make sure that you're competitive and can kind of reach all 3 lanes. So Sentinel would be a pretty good option as well. Other than that, I think those are probably the ones that I'd run with. This one, again, can feel a little bit tricky on turn 4, turn 5, simply because if you have her down, you've got to play on her. Now, it feels a bit better because, as you can see here, we've got a few more cards that we can fit in. We can fit in a Wasp, we can fit in a Bast, plus a 3-drop, plus a 4-drop on 5. So this list does feel a little bit better, a little bit less awkward. But obviously this is something completely different. You're trying to hit Cerebro, you're trying to hit Bast on some of these other big targets. But overall, Jean Grey, I think she's gonna do some damage in the meta. I think she's gonna be good. I think she's gonna be solid. I don't think I've seen a perfected list yet, the most optimized list yet. But I'd love to know what you guys have seen and what you have experimented with. So if you have done so, please feel free to put your list in the comments below, and I'd love to give it a shot. If you've hung around till now, I really appreciate you watching the video. Now would be a good time to subscribe and like if you haven't already. But until next time, have some fun.